Good day. Good day, and welcome to Mental Health and You. I'm your host, Cynthia Timms, and thank you so much for being part of this wonderful experience in mental wellness from a peer perspective. Speaking of such, we're taping this show in July for an August airing, but this is July still. But any month could be Minority Mental Health Month. And to help us talk about it more is my guest. She is the founder, she is the host of When the Sun Goes Down, 1969, a media platform on Instagram and Facebook that talks about mental health, particularly with women of color, mental health and physical health. But no further ado, I'm going to bring in her. Let's talk. Alexander Rauch. Miss Rauch, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. And let me just say this with no shade. It's Rouse. Um, I
Okay.
just wanted to correct you because names are important, right?
Thank
But I
you.
appreciate being here. I'm grateful that you asked me to be a part of this show. So thank you.
Well, thank you for accepting. Thank you. I was looking at your posts. I mean, I follow you. Thank you. And I was looking. You had something posted like maybe a week or so ago about Minority Mental Health Month.
Mm-hmm.
And up until then, I wasn't really aware. I know every day should be Mental Health Month for somebody,
Exactly.
be
Mhm.
that as it may. But you are the host of When the Sun Goes Down, 1969.
Yes,
That's a platform on Instagram and Facebook where you have weekly discussions about these sort of topics, particularly when
absolutely.
it comes to our community. So, what is 1969? What is When the Sun Goes Down? What's that all about, if you don't
Okay, so
mind?
first of all, so 1969 is the year I was born. And in
Yes.
1969, I always say was a great year. But it was also a year that was filled with so much, right? We had Woodstock, we had Vietnam, we had a lot of things going on in 1969, but that's why the 1969 is there. Um, when the Sun Goes Down, 1969 was created over a year ago. Initially, it was a group that I had on Facebook, a closed group in which I was in direct sales. I was actually selling adult toys. And so, what I would do initially was have these conversations about the body and issues related to intimacy, and then bring out a product to sell. So, this is nothing against direct sales or that particular company. I'm no longer in direct sales with that company. But what happened from these conversations was that women in the group were saying, I struggle with this and I struggle with that too. And thank you for that conversation. So I had decided I no longer wanted to have these conversations connected to selling a product. I wanted to have these conversations that connect us, especially women and especially women of color as humans. So that's how it came about.
Thank you for clarifying that. But that's all good, Alexander. But as I was have been continuing to follow you, you have a story in yourself. This show deals with mental health, particularly in communities of color. But you have a
Yes.
story in itself. What's your inspiration? Yes, you talk about direct sales, you talk about toys, you talk about all these things, but what brought you, of all things, what brought you to this field, particularly when it came from the mental health aspect?
So what brought me to wanting to have these conversations and put myself out there is that I am a survivor of attempted suicide. I am someone who is currently living with obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, um, depression, and I have a history of trauma. Um, I tried to kill myself well over 20 years ago. As an adolescent, I was in a very dark space, and I didn't know how to express that I was in a dark space. And because I was an adolescent, right? And that has lived with me. That attempted suicide has lived with me. I carry that. I'm also a survivor of sexual assault at gunpoint. That was traumatic. That trauma lives with me. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. That trauma lives with me. So it's compound trauma. And so that is why I have a particular interest in mental health awareness, mental illness, and advocacy for those of us who continue to live with a mental illness diagnosis.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know how difficult that must have been. We all have our journeys. We all have our traumas. We all have so much going, particularly as women of color, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But I have to ask, besides this show, what has been your supports? What were your supports? How did you deal with it when you didn't maybe have the show? How did you deal with it, or how has it impacted you?
So I have been in treatment off and on since for years, since I was an adolescent. The suicide attempt had me in treatment off and on, and ever since then, I've been in treatment. So I do see a therapist. Currently, I see a therapist every 2 weeks. I am on medication for my anxiety. I just started medication therapy about 2.5 years ago. I was very much against it, but at that time, my family has been a great support. My family has been a great support. My faith, I do believe in God. I believe in a higher power. I pray. I journal. I love to just be in the house singing, and I read. I read a lot. I love to read.
Right.
So those have been some of the things that I do continue to do, and I used to practice yoga. I haven't really been in tune with my practice, but I do aspire actually to get back into it. But I have some years ago I would practice yoga faithfully, and those have helped me with this journey of living with a mental illness.
Thank you for sharing that. Though some of those have helped me as well. I too have a history. I've talked about it so many times on this show. I do have a history of anxiety and depression myself. Of grief. You talk about a lot of times grief on your show and how that comes in many forms, and we've talked about that here. And those supports, and Alexandra, those supports, the meditation, be able to talk to somebody, medication if you have to, you know, that's all part of our support system. That's all part of our village. Being around supportive people, not everyone and everything is going to support you. They may act like they do, they may talk the talk, but not everyone is going to support, or they may try to minimalize, or this is, you'll get over it, we all have these things, this, that, and I dare say, Alexandra, sometimes as women of color, particularly black women, we have lived in a society where, you know, we have been made to believe that, this is just the what we carry. This is
Mhm.
just what we carry. We get up, we go to work, we take care of our family, and then we just keep moving because that's what we do. And we hide so much. Even when we're smiling, we hide so much. Even when we're laughing, when we're among friends and family and other people, because this is this mask that we gotta keep on just to keep going. I was reading a report recently by John Hopkins that only about 5% of practitioners are people of color. Practitioners, I mean social workers, psychiatrists. And sometimes I think maybe that's a barrier into finding help as well. Somebody who's culturally sensitive, maybe somebody who can maybe identify. Can you
Absolutely.
speak more
I
on that? And
Mhm.
what has been your experience in that, if any?
Oh, so I have to say, honestly, since I've been in therapy off and on since adolescent, I've had one therapist of color, and she was a Latina. It is incredibly difficult to find therapists of color, but also what's challenging is to find um, culturally sensitive therapists who accept your insurance, right? And then so insurance, which is a part of access to healthcare, especially mental health, right? That plays a big part in it. That plays a big part in it. When I didn't have insurance, um, I did not. I was not in therapy. Excuse me. And if I wasn't in therapy and I wasn't connected to a psychiatrist, then I couldn't get my medication, right? So it is a barrier. It is very challenging. And of course, I do want, someone who is culturally sensitive, culturally aware, someone who looks like me, representation, right? Representation, I know it's cliche, representation is everything, but it is everything.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. That has been a challenge of mine as well. A lot of people who, my work as a peer specialist during the day, that they have expressed that same concern. Be that as it may, it has forced us, I think, to create our own spaces, safe spaces, safe havens. What you do with your advocacy, hopefully, what I do with my peer support work here and other places. And what has been the reaction? I mean, how long have you been doing it? How long has the discussion been going on? How many
It's been
years?
it's been about 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. I get positive feedback, absolutely. I get positive feedback, especially in the closed group on Facebook. The closed group on Facebook, I see that people can be they feel safe, so people are more forthcoming. Um, but I do want to say this to you. I think being a peer, I think what you do is incredibly important, and I wish that way back when, and sometimes even now, that I had access to a peer again who looks like me, who understands me, um, who I don't have to explain that something happened at work today, and right away, my counterparts thought, oh, I was angry. When I wasn't angry, I was just expressing something or how I feel. So I do think the work that you're doing is important, and I thank you for doing that work.
Well, you're very welcome. Your work is important as well. We all do. We know we're all peers in some way. We're all doing the work that has to be done out of necessity, not just for our people, but sometimes just for our very self,
Absolutely.
our whole lives. I think I wanted to help others. I wanted to be an inspiration to others, but I was also helping myself, and Alexandra, I was also helping myself deal with my depression. I was also helping myself deal with my grief. And we've talked about grief on this show, and you've talked about grief, the
Yeah.
loss. We've had a lot of losses, as a society these past few years. I mean, COVID did a number on us, particularly
Hmm.
in our community. COVID did
Yes.
a number, economically, financially, emotionally, physically. You want
Yes.
to speak some more? How has your advocacy been impacted by COVID, if you don't mind sharing? And the role grief has played, particularly.
So I think what has happened during COVID is that because so many people were on lockdown, so to speak. I'm a nurse. I'm a licensed practical nurse. So I did take a brief time off during the start of COVID because I was my mother's caregiver as well. But I
Mm.
did go back to work during COVID. But I think during COVID, more people were looking towards the internet. So more people were coming on in the group, watching the lives, commenting. And I think people had to sit with themselves. So during COVID, so sitting with yourself, you were able to reflect and to notice what's going on. And so there was more participation in the group then. But in terms of grief, I have been talking about grief for the past 2 years in particular because I lost my mother in 2021. that has impacted what I'm doing. I have taken breaks from having these conversations because I've been grieving, right? And then I lost my brother this year in 2023. So it's compound grief. And again, that caused me to take a break from social media and a break from these platforms and having these conversations. So when you reached out to me, I said, okay, this is a sign for me to get back into doing what I'm doing. Because, like you said, um, in helping others, it is cathartic, right? So it's not just a matter of helping others, but absolutely, I feel that I'm helping myself by having these conversations um, and advocating for us as a community, right? Because we need it.
Yes, absolutely. We need it. We need it, and we continue to need it. You know, grief and depression and sorrow and just sadness and anxiety. You know, it's a part of life. But I
Mm,
also believe, Alexandra, that also finding joy is important too.
absolutely.
I can't, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the importance, yes, that support and finding joy wherever it may be, long as it's good and safe, you know, what does that? It may change as we
Mm-hmm.
come through grief, as we dealing with our grief, as we're dealing with depression, rediscovering that joy and that joy of life, that awareness that yes, in spite of everything, I'm still here. In
Yes.
spite of everything, those days, those those you talk your show is when the sun goes down. When the
Mm-hmm.
sun down and you're thinking and you're nothing, you're just there in your room with your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I
Yes.
think I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the joy that we find maybe still on the other side, in spite of the grief. And we're not going to minimize it because it's real. But there's also a joy. There's also a resiliency. I titled this particular episode "Resiliency"
Mm-hmm.
because I do believe, yes, it can be an overused word, but that's okay because there's something important about being able to get back up in spite of so much. I titled it "Respect" because I want people to know that in spite of everything, there's still a respect that we have to put on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a joy that we have to put on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Refining these things is so important, and that's part of the process, Alexander.
Absolutely.
If you don't mind, how has that taken hold? That resiliency. Yes, you talked about your coping skills. We talked about find your support, but resiliency in the midst of it, finding
I
your
think for sure. Um, I do think that the term being resilient, especially when it comes to Black and Brown women, is kind of overrated. But the fact remains that we are resilient and we need to tap into that we are resilient. And it's not a bad thing to be resilient. In terms of joy, I take joy in the moments that I get it. And I feel like black joy is just like and so I find joy in the little things, in things that people may not consider joyous. When I read a book that I really love, I find joy in that. That's joy for me. When I'm in my house cleaning and I'm blasting my daddy's music, as I call it, I find joy in that. Right now, when I'm playing music that reminds me of my brother, I find joy in that. I find joy in taking walks by myself. Um, there is joy all around us. And absolutely, in the midst of depression, anxiety, OCD, there are sprinkles of joy everywhere. So, yes, I encourage Black and Brown women to find joy wherever you can.
yes,
Yes, sure.
indeed. Thank you for sharing that, and I think that's important that we remember that. Because as I said, it's been days in my life, it's been days in this journey, and that I was like, why am I even bothering to get out of bed?
Mhm.
Is it going to even make a difference?
Mhm.
But it's the kind words that somebody can give me, or maybe I can give a kind word. Sometimes we don't think you're making headway somewhere, or things are dark, and then you go outside and you feel, Alexander, this wonderful breeze, and you feel the sun on your face.
Mhm.
You're talking about taking a walk. I love parks. I think public parks are so wonderful. You
Mhm.
know, uh, the smell of the grass, things we take for
Yeah.
granted. You
Yes.
know, the trees after a rain. You know, the fragrance of nature.
Mhm.
Talk about that in my advocacy, how nature has played a part. You
Mhm.
know, you talked about your love of books, and I get that. I
Mhm.
love to write. Writing has always been a joy of mine. I write when I'm happy. I write when I'm sad. I
Mhm.
write when I'm confused. With sometimes I don't even know. I open up the page and I'm like, what do I write about? Because it's like something that stirs and pours out of me. And how sometimes you don't even know where it's coming from.
Mhm.
There's joy like there's tears. You
Mhm.
know, it just comes out of you and it's like, oh, okay. In spite of everything, Cynthia, you have a purpose.
Yes.
Alexander, in spite of everything, somebody sees you and watches over you.
Yes.
And that gives you a reason to keep going.
Yes.
Grief in the midst of everything. I mean, joy in the midst of everything.
Yes.
Yeah, real. And we do encourage, to get help, be doing professional help. Yes. You know,
Absolutely.
don't talk against medication on this show because that's a part of our wellness if you have to take it, you know.
Mhm.
But so is finding the right therapist. So is finding other people and other things that support you.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what's your vision going forward with when the sun goes down? What's your vision? What's your hopes? What's your dreams? And Alexandra.
So my vision is to be able to reach more people, a larger group, to have more engaging conversation. Right now, what I'm trying to work on for the near future is to talk more about grief, because I am in the midst of grief and grieving, right? And but also to have some kind of in-person event to bring together Black and Brown people, BIPOC people, to talk about grief, because there's so much grief in our community, and I just feel that there's not enough safe spaces for us to discuss grief. And I also feel that death and dying is still taboo in our community, and that we need this. So that's my vision for the near future. But absolutely to just increase the conversation, to have more conversations. So that's my vision.
And if somebody want to join, how can they reach out? How can they find you, Alexandra?
Well, I'm Instagram is when the sun goes down 1969. You can absolutely DM me. Um, and if you're interested in being a guest, I would love to have you. So absolutely DM me through there. That's the platform that I'm using right now for the conversations. When the sun goes down 1969 on Instagram.
Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, as I said earlier in the show, we're taping this in July. You call it Minority Mental Health Month
Yes,
for the August tape for August showing, but
mm,
any day, any month, because as
absolutely.
you stated, we got so much going on. I'm on the trains, I'm in the streets, in my
Mm,
office, and we're laughing, we're having fun, but I'm seeing it, young kids. young mothers, young women,
Mm.
older kids, older mothers, men and women. We walking around with such, you see a lot on the train.
Absolutely.
You see a lot. I'm always trying to figure out what so and so is doing for a living. But I'm also like thinking about, gee, you can tell the expressions on people's face sometimes. Yeah, I know they had a hard time. They must have some type of day.
Hmm.
So that's why I think I have to talk about, repeat. We have to emphasize how important platforms like what you do is so important. You know, what do you tell someone, Alexandra, who may be resistant? They may still be guarded. How do you share? How do you that it's okay to share and you're not weak and you're not crazy for doing so? Because that's stigma in our community. Oh, I'm not going to talk about my issues. I'm going to take it. I'm going to take it, leave it alone. I'm going to take it to God. That's okay. I don't need no therapist. I don't need no medication. I don't need you. I'm just going to deal with it.
Hmm.
How you deal with that resistance?
So first thing, you could believe in God, go to church, and still go to therapy.
There
Okay,
you go.
they can work together. Okay,
Mhm.
so faith without works. All right, faith without works. So you can have faith, you can believe in God, and you can still go to therapy. In terms of me meeting someone or talking to someone who doesn't want to speak, I always encourage them to do so, and I tell them, in your time, when it's your time, because you can't rush the process. So if someone is not there yet, they may not be there yet, but hold space for them. Hold space for them. Let them know, in your time, I'm here. um, and if it's not me, find someone else. um, and there's resources out there. So, but I encourage people to speak your truth, tell your story, because that's how we are connected, by sharing stories.
That is how we're connected, by sharing stories. That's what we try to do.
Hmm.
Alexandra, I want to thank you so much for being part of Mental Health and You, this experience in mental wellness from a peer perspective. And we got to
Thank
talk
you.
some more. We got to
Yes,
talk some more.
ma'am.
This is an ongoing thing. This is an
Yes,
ongoing topic. I want to
yes,
thank Bronxnet. I want to thank everyone for just helping us get through this one more time.
absolutely. Yes.
From
Thank you
Health
so
with You,
much.
Alexandra, thank you so much. We
Thank
wish
you.
you love. Be kind to yourself. Thank you so
Likewise.
much.
Peace and
Be well.
blessings.
Peace and blessings. Thank you.
All righty. Bye bye.
Hey.